My son stood up at the head of my own dining room table, lifted a glass of champagne I had chilled that morning, and toasted his new wife as the first real medicine this family had ever seen. "To Dr. Chelsea Hale," Malcolm said, grinning around at everybody. "4 generations of this family, and finally, we've got real medicine at the table. The first real medicine in this family. Baby, you did what nobody before you could do." Glasses went up all around my table. My table, set with my mother's china, loaded with a brisket I had put in at 5 that morning and macaroni I had grated 3 kinds of cheese for by hand. And Chelsea stood up next to him in that white coat, brand new, creases still sharp from the box, because she had worn it to dinner. Worn a doctor's coat to a family dinner. She laid her hand flat on her chest like she was humbled, and then she laughed and said the thing. "Stop it, y'all. Stop." She waved her glass at them. Although, let's be fair to Mama Vivian. She was in medicine too, in her own little way. Bedpans and bandages aren't exactly medicine, but somebody's got to change them. And she looked dead at me, sweet as pie, and she winked. 40 years of bedpans. Bless your heart. Now this family finally has a doctor. To Dr. Hale, somebody down the table called, laughing, the real one, and the glasses touched, and my brother's boy said, "Aunt Viv, you must be so proud." And I said, "I surely am," because I was, and because that is what a person says. And I picked up the empty bread basket to have somewhere to put my hands. And my son laughed. That is the part I have had to sit with. Not the guests studying their plates like there was scripture written in the gravy. My son, my only child, the boy I worked double shifts to put through college, threw his head back and laughed, and lifted his glass a little higher. I said not one word. I stood up, smoothed my good tablecloth where it had bunched, and went to the kitchen to get the pound cake, because that is the thing I know how to do when a room turns cruel. I serve. I have been serving all my life. But while I sliced that cake at my own counter, I looked down at my hands. 63 years old, and steady as a level table. And I thought about a certain hospital in this city, and what happens in a hallway there when somebody says my name out loud. Because there are people in this town, people in long white coats, who say the name Vivian Hale in a voice my son has never once heard used for me. Nobody chewing my brisket that night knew what I carried, because I had never told them, and I will give you the honest reason why before this story is over. There was a thing I owned, worn smooth and quiet as an old hymnal, that not one soul at that table understood the worth of. They were about to take it off my wall, and months later, one of the most respected doctors in this city would stand up in front of my whole family and half my congregation and tell them exactly what it was they had laughed at. My name is Vivian Hale. I am 63. I live in Birmingham, Alabama. I buried my husband 11 years ago, and for 41 years, I was a nurse. Emergency room, mostly. Neonatal intensive care before that. Night shifts, code blues, and other people's worst days, and I retired 2 years back with a box of pins and no parade, which suited me, because I did not do it for a parade. Before I take you back to where this really started, do one thing for me. Put in the comments where in the world you are listening from and what time it is there. I read every single one, late at night with my tea. And if anybody ever looked at your life's work and called it small, type the word amen down there so I know you understand this story from the inside. Because my mother used to say the Lord keeps his own books, and he does not use anybody else's arithmetic. Hold on to that. Now settle in somewhere soft and stay with me, because I mean to tell it all in order. The dinner. The wall What my daughter-in-law did at that church cookout when a man's heart stopped in front of 200 people, and what walked out of that ambulance and turned to look at me. Start with the hands, because that is where nursing starts. My mother cleaned houses on the south side of this city, and her mother picked cotton outside Selma, and when I told my mother at 9 years old that I wanted to work in a hospital, she did not laugh. She went quiet, and then she said, "Then you will be the first one of us they let touch the patients instead of the floors." I did not understand the size of that sentence until I was grown. I came up through nursing school in the 70s, one of 3 black women in my class, and I would not spend your evening on what that was like, except to say I learned early that I would have to be twice as prepared for half the benefit of the doubt. So, I became a woman who is always prepared. I graduated second in my class. The one who graduated first quit nursing after 4 years. I gave it 41. I started in neonatal intensive care, the preemie ward, babies you could hold in one palm like a bird fallen out of the nest. I learned to read a baby who could not tell you one thing about what was wrong. I learned that the machines lie sometimes, and the skin never does. Learned to see trouble coming an hour out, the color at the lips, the flare at the nostrils. The feed refused a certain quiet way. There is a kind of watching you do with your eyes that no school teaches. Years teach it. Then I moved to the emergency room, and the emergency room is where I stayed for 32 years, and the emergency room is where I became whatever it is I am. You want to know what an ER nurse does? Everything. At speed. In order. And mostly without a word of thanks. I have cut wedding dresses off crash victims. I have held the hand of a man my own daddy's age while he passed, because his people could not get there in time and nobody ought to go alone. And more nights than I could ever count, I quietly caught the mistakes of exhausted young doctors before those mistakes could reach a bed. I remember one, 3 in the morning, a resident writing up a dose of a heart drug for a sick child, and I read it over his shoulder, and my stomach dropped. I did not shame him before the whole room. I stepped in close and said, "Lo, doctor, walk me through that dose one more time. For the baby's weight." He looked at his own numbers, and I watched the color leave his face. "Oh my God," he said. "Nurse Hale, that would have stopped her heart." "It didn't," I said. "Fix it, and breathe, and nobody in this world but us two will ever know it happened. How did you even see that? You weren't assigned to her." "Baby," I said, "I see everything. Now fix it." And he fixed it. And that child went home, and that doctor is a father of 3 who still saves lives, and he does not know to this day that he owes one of them to me. That is the job. Everybody goes home safe, especially the ones who get the credit. And I train them. That is the part of this story you have to hold on to. For the last 19 years I worked, I was a preceptor, which is a plain word for the nurse who raises the babies. Not the infant babies, the new nurses, and the new doctors, the residents who come in every July, smart as whips and green as June corn, shaking so hard on their first code they cannot get the cap off a syringe. Somebody has to stand behind those children at 2 in the morning when the whole thing goes sideways for the first time in their young lives. For 19 years at that hospital, more often than not, that somebody was me. There was one resident. I will not say much about him yet, because it is not time, but there was one, some years back, worse rattled than any I ever had. First week of July, first real code, froze solid in the doorway of Trauma 1 with both hands in the air like the room had pulled a gun. I stood that one back up. What I said in the hallway afterward took 11 minutes. And I have never repeated it to a living soul, and that 11 minutes is going to come back into this story when you least expect it, walking across a church parking lot in a white coat. Not yet, though. Not yet. I also built a thing, though I did not think of it as building anything at the time. In my last decade there, after we lost a patient we should not have lost, on a night when 3 small mistakes lined up like train cars, I sat at my table until 4 in the morning and wrote out longhand every check I run in my own head at every handoff. The questions I ask myself without knowing I ask them. 40 years of my mother's arithmetic, put down plain, 1 page, in order. I typed it up and I handed it to a young nurse on a Tuesday. Run this every handoff, I told her. Every single one. Even when you're sure. Especially when you're sure. What is it? She said. It's nothing, I said. It's just how I think. Well, other people came to call that nothing something, and the name they gave it had my own name inside it. That is all I will say about the page for now. I retired on a Tuesday, and I drove home and did not know what to do with my hands for about a year. 41 years of pins. Service pins, unit pins, my original school pin from the capping ceremony, back when they still capped nurses like something holy was happening, because it was. I kept them all in a worn brown leather box the size of a Bible, and my husband, before he passed, God rest that good man, framed my favorites in a shadow box and hung it in my hallway himself, level as a deacon's conscience, right where you see it when you walk in my door. He used to touch it when he passed, like other men touch a doorpost. Now, Malcolm. My son is not a bad man. You should know that early, because it would be easy to hate him here, and I never once managed it, though I tried. But Malcolm came up, watching me leave at 6 in the evening in scrubs and drag home at 8 in the morning smelling like a hospital. And somewhere in his growing up he decided what his mama did was not a profession. It was just tiredness, the reason there was no mother at certain school plays. He never once saw me work. That is the thing about my work. The people who love you never see you do it, and you cannot respect what you have never seen. His daddy saw it one time. Emmett came to my floor with a sprained wrist the year before we married. That is a whole other story, and he watched me for 1 hour from a plastic chair, and he told me later that hour is why he proposed. I watched you run that whole room without ever raising your voice, he said. Everybody in there was scared but you. Emmett understood me. He died of a stroke one Sunday morning 11 years ago, with his church shoes already on, and I did his compressions myself on our bedroom floor until the truck came. And even at the worst hour of my life, my hands knew their order. We got 11 more days out of him, enough for goodbyes. At the funeral, people said, "At least you got to say goodbye." It was my hands that bought those goodbyes, and I never told a soul that the widow had been the first responder. That is the shape of the thing I keep doing. It has a price, and I am the one who paid it. And then Malcolm, at 34, met Chelsea. Chelsea came to us in her last year of medical school, and I will be fair to her, because a story where the other woman has no reasons is a lie with a plot. She grew up with less than nothing out from Bessemer, raised by an aunt who did not want her, and she clawed her whole life toward one idea, that if she could just get the white coat, nobody could look down on her again. The trouble with people who climb like that is what they have to believe about the folks on the rungs below. She could not afford to believe an old nurse might know things a young doctor does not, because her one comfort in all those hard years was that the coat would put her above everybody. Starting, I suppose, with me. The first time Malcolm brought her to Sunday dinner, she stood in my front hall with her coat over her arm and looked at my shadow box of pins for a long minute, and I thought, oh, she sees it. And then she said, "Aw, look at these. They used to give nurses little pins? That is precious. and she walked on into my dining room and complimented my curtains. They used to give nurses little pins. I stood in my own hallway and heard 41 years called precious. And I said nothing. And I served the chicken. And I watched my son watch her all through dinner with his whole heart hanging out of his face. And I prayed over the dishes that night, low, out loud, the only way I know how. Lord, I said, that child is going to need somebody someday. The ones who climb that hard always do. So keep my mouth kind until she does, and keep me from saying the one true thing that would feel so good to say. Amen. I did not know I was prophesying. You never do. They married quick at the courthouse because of her schedule, and I made a cake anyway and stood on the courthouse steps in my good lavender suit and welcomed that girl into my family, and I meant it. Whatever else I tell you tonight, I meant it. And this spring, Chelsea matched into a residency at the hospital downtown. My hospital. The very building. Emergency medicine, if you can believe it, though I had told her nothing about my years, because she had never asked. I gave her openings. I am ashamed to tell you how many. One Sunday, when she was going on about her rotations, I set down the platter and said, "Easy. You know, I spent a little time in an emergency room myself, back in the day." "Aw, that is so sweet," Chelsea said, not looking up from her plate. "It is a whole different world now, though. You would not even recognize it." And she turned to Malcolm and picked back up about her attending. "Mama worked nights," Malcolm offered. "I bet that was hard on you, growing up," Chelsea said to him, warm. And that was the end of it. The talk moved back to her, where it always moved, and I passed the greens. In 4 years of Sunday dinners, my daughter-in-law, the doctor, never once asked the retired nurse a single question about her career. The white coat ceremony was in May. We all went. I sat in the third row and clapped until my palms stung, and my heart was proud. When they read her name and slid that coat on her shoulders, I cried. Whatever came after, that afternoon, I cried for the girl from Bessemer, because I knew what the climb had cost her, even if she never knew I knew. The dinner was 2 weeks later, the dinner I opened this story with. My house, my table, 12 people, brisket and macaroni and a lemon-pound cake to celebrate her going into that building where she would, though nobody in the room knew to say it, be walking the same halls I walked for 32 years. But you have not heard what happened after the cake, and after is where it broke. They were gathering coats in the front hall, all warm and loud with wine, when Chelsea stopped in front of my shadow box, tapped the glass with one fingernail, and turned to Malcolm with her head cocked like a decorator. "Babe, you know what would look amazing right here? My diploma. Right here where you see it when you walk in. This spot is wasted on like a craft box." I was holding somebody's coat. I remember the weight of the coat on my arm, and I waited for my son to laugh her off. "Sweetheart, that is Mama's 40 years, that stays. Something, anything at all." "Yeah," my son said slow, looking at my pins with his whole face going agreeable. "Yeah, you know what? This hallway could use an upgrade." "Mama, you don't care, right? You can keep the little pins in your room. It's not like it's a diploma or anything, and Chelsea's is from an actual medical school, so it's not like it's a diploma or anything." "Right here, Malcolm, dead center," Chelsea was already saying, measuring the wall with her hands. "We'll move Mama Vivian's little box to her bedroom. It'll be cozy in there." My sister-in-law Deborah, standing by the door with her purse on her arm, said, "Careful." "Vivian, honey, you sure? Those pins been up a long time." "She's sure," Chelsea said warm before I could open my mouth. "Aren't you, Mama Vivian? You're not precious about stuff like that." Here is what I did. I looked at my boy for one long breath, waiting on him to say one word. He looked at the floor. So I reached up with my two steady hands, and I took my own pins down off my own wall. And I said, of course, this wall should celebrate the family's future. And I carried that shadow box back to my bedroom, and I set it on the quilt, and I stood there in the dark a minute with my hand flat on the glass, over all those little gold years. I did not cry. I went back out, and I found the hammer and the picture hook myself, because Malcolm never could find anything in that house, and by the time the last guest left, Chelsea's diploma hung in my front hallway in a frame she had brought with her in the car. She had brought the frame with her, in the car, to my house, for her own celebration dinner. That night I knelt down by my bed, the same as every night of my life, and I will tell you my exact prayer, because it matters for what comes later. I did not pray for Chelsea to be humbled. Old church women get accused of praying those prayers, and I know some who do. But I did not. Lord, I prayed, kneeling there on the hard floor, they do not know. They genuinely do not know what hung on that wall. So don't let me grow bitter waiting on them to learn it. And when the day comes that they do learn it, and Lord, you and I both know the day always comes, let me be standing somewhere kind when it happens. Don't let me be waiting with a knife. Amen. Then I put my pins in the closet, up on the shelf next to Emmett's hats, and I went on being this family's grandmother, cook, and bedpan story. Now I promise to explain why I never told them, why 41 years stayed folded quiet in a leather box instead of spread on the table the first time Chelsea got smart with me. One sentence would have done it. Some of it was pride, the deep kind that looks like humility, that says, if they cannot see it on their own, I will not beg. I own that. But most of it was older than me. I was maybe 12, and I had come home from school crying because a teacher had told me girls like me made good maids, and my mother was at the ironing board, and she did not stop ironing. She said, "Come here. Look at me. Are you a maid?" "No, ma'am." "Then why are you crying over a lie a tired woman told you?" She set the iron down. "Baby, listen to me and don't forget it. You do not explain yourself to people who have already decided what you are. You will spend your whole life exhausted if you try. Your life is the explanation. You live it long enough, right and quiet, and it will speak for you louder than your mouth ever could." She was quoting her own mother, who could not read one word, and was, by every account I ever heard, the wisest woman in 3 counties. The women I come from did not argue with the people who looked down on them. They outlasted them. It is a whole inheritance, that silence, and I will not pretend to you that it is only dignity and a shield, because it is also a wound. And that is the inheritance I was spending every quiet Sunday, while my daughter-in-law called my life precious. Besides, I knew something Chelsea did not. Something she was about to learn in that building the hard way, which is that emergency medicine has a long memory, and I had left a good deal of myself inside those walls. I figured they could speak for me whenever they got ready. I just never imagined they would pick a church cookout to do it. The first Sunday after the dinner, I did what I have done every Sunday of my life. I got up, I put on my good blue dress, and I went to church. New Canaan Missionary Baptist, red brick, white trim, 3 blocks from the house Emmett and I bought in 1982. That church has had my Tuesday nights for the food pantry, my Thursday mornings for the sick and shut in list, and my sweet potato pies for every repast for decades, and the people in it are my people. Which made what happened later in front of all of them so much worse, and in the end, so much better. Malcolm and Chelsea came that Sunday too, because Chelsea had figured out fast that church is where this community does its noticing, and she walked in with the white coat story going before her like a drum major. By the time service let out, half the congregation knew we had a doctor in the family, and I stood on the steps and smiled while my son told 3 deacons the story of her match day, and not one soul asked me a question. And that was fine. It was at the repast after 3rd Sunday service, maybe a month later, that the thing with Mother Hattie happened, and you need to see this one clear. Because it is small and quiet, and it is the whole story in miniature. Mother Hattie Simmons is 86 years old, sharp as vinegar, raised 4 children on a postal clerk's pay, and has held down the same end seat of the same pew since before integration. I have known her 50 years, and at that repast she was sitting across from me, picking at her plate, and I watched her rub her calf twice, and I watched her breathing. You remember what I said about the listening a nurse does with her eyes. Her breathing was wrong. Little bit fast, little bit shallow, and her color had gone that gray that lives underneath brown skin, the gray you learn in your first year on nights. Hattie. I said, easy, passing her the rolls. What did the new doctor put you on for your pressure? Oh, child, some new pill. Starts with an L. And the heart doctor gave me a water pill last month. And my knee doctor has me on my arthritis pills, you know, for the swelling. You still taking the pink ones from the drugstore for your back? The ones you buy yourself? Every morning, baby. 2 of them. Been taking them for years. I set the rolls down. Water pill and pressure pill and store-bought back pills on top. In a woman her age, that mix strips potassium and beats on the kidneys, and her rubbing that calf and that gray around her mouth had my neck prickling. This is not doctoring. Hear me. This is a checklist older than most doctors. This is any good nurse of 40 years at a church picnic. Hattie. Do me a favor. Monday morning, call your heart doctor's office and tell them exactly what all you take, including the pink pills, because those don't mix kindly with your new prescriptions, and ask them to check your blood work. Will you do that? Monday, not next month. And Mother Hattie, who has watched me be right about these things since Carter was president, patted my hand and said, I'll call them Monday. Vivian. That would have been the whole story, except Chelsea was 2 seats down. And Chelsea had heard the tale of it, and Chelsea laughed. Out loud, silvery, a laugh built for a room to hear it. Mama Vivian. Are you in here adjusting medications at the potluck? She said it warm, like a joke, which is a certain kind of woman's favorite knife. Y'all, we have got to watch her. She watched a lot of medical shows while she was, doing her nursing thing. She leaned toward Mother Hattie, and her voice went to the voice you use for a child holding scissors. Miss Hattie, don't you go changing anything based on picnic advice, okay? Pharmacology is really complicated. It's really a physician conversation. That's actually why I went to school for it. The table chuckled, because she is charming, and because a white coat says trust me even when it is 2 months old and has never once been thrown up on. Mother Hattie looked confused, caught between 50 years of me and this bright, loud girl with the credentials, and she did what scared people do. She went with the coat. Well, maybe I'll just leave it all alone then, Hattie said, and my stomach dropped, because leaving it all alone was the one wrong answer in the whole deck. I could have opened my mouth right there and laid my 41 years on the table like a royal flush. Potassium, creatinine, the drug names, the mechanism, the exact reason, in language that would have snapped that girl's spine straight. Understand, the sentence was loaded. I had it. And I looked at Chelsea, shining in the thick of her laugh, my son beside her grinning, The whole table warmed toward them, and I heard my mother. Never explain yourself to people who have already decided what you are. So this is what I did instead, and you can judge me for it. Some nights I judge myself. I said, "You're right, Chelsea. It's surely a doctor conversation." "Hattie, just you tell your doctor everything you take, that's all I meant." I rose and refilled the tea pitchers. Both of them, all down both tables, like the help. But Monday morning, 7:45, I was parked outside Mother Hattie's little house over on Ridgeway, and I drove that woman to her heart doctor myself. In the exam room, with Hattie's daughter on the speakerphone, I laid it all out for the nurse practitioner, quiet and polite. She's on the new pressure pill and a water pill from cardiology, and she buys these pink ones over the counter for her back. 2 every morning, for years. I'd feel a lot better if you ran her labs today instead of waiting on the next visit. The young woman looked at the bottles, then looked at me. "You a nurse?" 41 years. Retired now. It shows. She ordered the labs, and when the numbers came back, she went still, and she looked at me a long second, and then she turned to Hattie. "Miss Hattie, it is real good you came in today. Your potassium is down in your shoes and your kidneys are starting to labor. We are going to fix some things right now. 10 more days of leaving it be, and that woman is on a gurney headed to my old emergency room, if she is lucky." Nobody at church ever knew. Hattie tried to tell it, and I hushed her, and not out of humility, out of arithmetic. Told, it would have been a story about Chelsea being wrong, in a congregation she had just joined. My word against hers, the mother-in-law with the bedpans against the doctor. That story heals nothing. It just makes Sunday dinner into a war. So I traded the credit for the peace, the same trade I have made my whole life, and in the parking lot, Mother Hattie said the thing that carried me through the whole next season of being mocked. "You've been watching over me 50 years, Vivian Hale. I don't care what kind of coat that child has. She's a good girl, Hattie. She's just young. She's young, and you're right, and both those things can be true." She squeezed my hand hard. "Everybody at that church knows whose hands they want on them when it counts. Don't you let one loud girl make you forget it." "I won't," I said. I did, a little, that whole long summer. But I didn't tell Hattie that. "Everybody knew," she said. Well, everybody was about to find out in a fashion I could not have dreamed. Now, if you have made it this far into my story, do an old nurse one small favor before the road turns hard. If a woman who kept her dignity while her own family called her small is worth your evening, subscribe so stories like mine keep finding the people who live them. And tell me in the comments whether you have ever had to smile and refill the tea while somebody took the credit for your whole life. I read every one. All right. Here is where it gets worse. And then here is where God shows out completely. That summer, my granddaughter Jasmine turned up pregnant with her first, and the whole family lit up like a revival tent. Jasmine is my late sister's grandbaby, technically my great-niece, but she lost her own grandmother young and I raised her summers, and that child has called me Grandma Vivian since she could talk, and I let her, because that is who I am. She is 24 now, married to a sweet, slow, smiling boy who does vac work, and when she told the family she was expecting, she told them at that kitchen table, because that is the table where this family's news gets told. You know who spent 32 years watching what goes sideways with pregnant women, and 4 years before that learning what a baby in trouble looks like from across a room? If there is one lane in this life that is mine, it is a scared young black mother carrying her first baby. That is not just my career, it is my calling. And in this state, with the numbers being what they are for black mothers, it is a calling with stakes. So when Jasmine asked, shy, at that kitchen table, Grandma Vivian, "Will you come to my appointments with me?" Mama can't always get off work, and you know all the questions to ask. My whole chest filled up with warm. Yes, baby, yes, I will. I marked every date on the calendar by my refrigerator in red pen. I went to exactly 2 appointments. And then the family had what Malcolm called a sit-down. A sit-down. In my own living room, on a Sunday after church, with the good coffee out. Malcolm sat on the edge of my sofa with his elbows on his knees like he does when he has practiced a speech in the truck, and Chelsea sat beside him with her ankles crossed and a soft, sorry look already arranged on her face. And Jasmine was not there, which told me everything before a word got said. You do not hold a sit-down about a person with that person in the room. You hold it about them. Mama, Malcolm started, we love that you want to be involved with Jasmine and the baby. We do. Nobody's saying you don't mean well. Nobody's saying you don't mean well. I have learned that when a sentence starts by defending your heart, it is about to go after your usefulness. But Chelsea's a doctor now, he went on, and this is like a medical situation, a first pregnancy, and we think it makes more sense for the person with the actual training to be the point person on the medical stuff. So Jasmine's not confused about who to listen to. I looked at my son, then at my daughter-in-law, who was nodding along gently with her head tipped, wearing that sorry face like a borrowed coat. Chelsea's specialty, I said, careful, easy, is emergency medicine. She matched in emergency. Prenatal care is a whole different lane. It's all connected, Mama Vivian. It's all one body. Chelsea smiled at me, patient. Like I was a slow student she had all the time in the world for. 4 years of medical school covers a lot more than a nursing certificate. I promise you. I'm not talking about school, I said. I'm talking about a first pregnancy in a black woman in Alabama. There are things you watch for, things you don't wait on, and I know all of them. That's literally what the training is for. She tipped her head. I know you did your best with what you had back then, and honestly, I think it's beautiful that you cared for people. But medicine has changed so much since the 70s. Some of what you learned could actually be dangerous now. I'd feel better if Jasmine's getting her information from a current licensed physician. She let it sit a beat. For the baby's sake. You understand. For the baby's sake. She had put the baby between us like a shield, so that anything I said back would sound like I was arguing against the baby. Some of what you learned could actually be dangerous now. I sat in my own chair, in the house where I had rocked my son through croup so bad I steamed the bathroom half the night, and I felt that sentence walk clear across the room and sit down on my chest. Mama, Malcolm leaned in, gentle, closing it. It's not a knock on you. We just think it's cleaner if there's one voice. You get it, right? I looked at Malcolm one more time. Son, I said, I have caught things in first pregnancies that a scan will miss. I am only asking to sit in the room. And you can visit, Chelsea said, gentle as a closing door. As her grandmother. Just not as her medical person. I really think that's healthiest for everybody. I got it. And I want to tell you what I did not do. Because it is the whole shape of me. I never mentioned that I still recertified in advanced cardiac life support every 2 years out of a habit of readiness I could not break. I never said I had trained residents from the very program that graduated the girl on my sofa. I did not mention my license was still active, because nobody had thought to ask. I said none of it. All right, I said. She's your family, and you're her parents' choice. I'll step back. And I rose and refilled the good coffee. That night I took Jasmine's dates off my refrigerator calendar, the ones I had marked in red pen, and I did it slow. And it is a small thing to erase red pen off a calendar, but my hand did not want to do it. Then I knelt down by my bed, and I had no fine prayer ready. I just said, Lord, keep that baby, keep that girl, and put somebody in that room who can see what I can see, because they will not let it be me anymore. If it can't be me, then you put somebody there who has the eyes for it. I am asking you plain, and I am asking you to hurry. Amen. And I got in the bed, and I hardly slept. And remember that prayer, the plain one, keep that girl, and put somebody in the room who can see. Because God has a way of answering the plain one sideways, and he was already moving, and I could not see it yet. Now I step back, like I said I would. But stepping back is not the same as going blind, and a nurse of 41 years does not lose her eyes because her family took her calendar. I still saw that child at Sunday dinner every single week, and by her 5th month, I did not like what I saw. Jasmine's face had gone puffy in a way that was not the good round of a healthy pregnancy. Her ankles above her church shoes were swollen tight and shiny, and when I hugged her, I could feel it, that spongy fullness that does not belong. She had a headache she kept rubbing at the back of her neck, and one Sunday she told me, laughing it off, that she had seen little sparkles at the edge of her sight while she was doing the dishes, like sun off water, and it went away, so it was nothing. Little sparkles at the corner of the eye, swelling in the face and hands, a headache at the back of the skull that will not quit. If you have ever worked labor and delivery, those 3 things just stood the hair up on your arms, same as they stood up mine. That is the body ringing a bell. That is the front edge of the thing that kills more mothers who look like my Jasmine than almost anything else, and it is quiet. And it is fast, and it does not care one bit about anybody's feelings. I had no standing to march in and take over. I had given that away in my own living room over the good coffee. So I did the only thing a stepped-back grandmother can do. I got Jasmine alone in my kitchen, drying dishes, hip to hip, as we had stood 1,000 times since she was tall enough to reach the sink. Baby, I said, real light, drying a bowl, how's your head today? It's fine, Grandma, little achy. Chelsea says it's normal. And those little sparkles you saw doing the dishes? That was just the once. Listen at me a second, I said. Next time you see your doctor, you tell them about the sparkles and the headache and that swelling in your face, and you ask them one word for me. You ask them to check you for preeclampsia. Can you hold that word? Preeclampsia, and you tell them your grandmother made you ask. And Jasmine, God love her, 24 and tired and trusting the people she was told to trust, said Grandma. Chelsea already looked at my ankles. She said swelling's normal. Everybody swells. She said you'd worry me over normal pregnancy stuff because that's just how you are. Because that's just how you are. So, it had already been said about me, in a room I was not in, to a girl I would lie down in traffic for. The worrier. The old nurse who frets. They had inoculated that child against my alarm before I ever got to raise it. I dried the same plate for a while. Well, I said, you ask them anyway, for me. Just say the word and let the doctor tell you it's nothing. There's no harm in a question, is there? Okay, Grandma, she kissed my cheek. She smelt like the vanilla lotion I put in her stocking every Christmas. You worry too much. But okay. She did not ask. I found that out later. She meant to. And life is busy. And a bright, confident in-law with a coat had already told her it was normal. And so a 24-year-old girl did the human thing and believed the confident voice over the worried one. That is not her fault. I want that said plain. When the whole world hands a young mother a hierarchy and puts the coat on top and the grandmother down at the bottom with the bedpans, she cannot be blamed for reading the sign as it was written for her. But I went home and could not sit down. I took down my worn leather box from the closet shelf, opened it on my bed, put my hand flat on all those little gold years, and said out loud, "To the pins, to Emmett, to God, I am still here. Whatever you all decided I am still here, and I can still see. And if that baby's body rings the bell where I can hear it, coat or no coat, these two hands are going to answer. You hear me? They are going to answer." I could not know how soon I would be tested on that. I thought the test, if it came, would come for Jasmine. It came for a 69-year-old deacon named Curtis Boyd on the hottest Saturday of the summer at the church cookout, with the whole congregation watching. And it came for me. But before I take you into that afternoon, you need to see the last insult, the one that came the week before, so you understand exactly how low they had set me the day my hands had to prove what 41 years were worth. It was a Wednesday, at the monthly potluck the sick and shut-in committee puts on. I have run that kitchen going on 20 years. It is one of the few rooms left in my life where nobody had decided I was small. Chelsea came that Wednesday, because Chelsea had discovered that the church was where her white coat cast the longest shadow, and she came in her scrubs straight from a shift with her hospital badge still clipped to her hip so everybody could see it. And a young mother from the congregation, a girl named Tamika with a toddler on her hip, had brought her baby's medicine question to the potluck like people bring their questions to church, and Chelsea was holding court about it by the coffee urns. I was not going to say a word. I was slicing ham. But I heard Chelsea tell that young mother that a little fever after the baby's shots was fine, and she should just alternate the two fever medicines every 3 hours around the clock through the night to stay ahead of it. Every 3 hours, around the clock, both medicines, and a toddler. My knife stopped. Now hear me. Alternating those two is a thing people do. But the safe dose depends on the child's weight. And doubling up around the clock all night without watching that dose is how a tired mother overshoots. And that overshoot goes after a baby's liver, quiet, until there is a great deal of drama. It is one of the most common medication errors there is with little ones, and I had caught it more times than I could count. I could not let it stand. Not with a baby. There are insults I will eat all day long, but I will not eat a baby. So I set down my knife, and I wiped my hands on my apron, and I walked over, and I did it as gentle as I have ever done anything. "Tamika, honey," I said, "that's good advice from the doctor, and I'll just add one grandmother thing, because I gave a lot of these. Whatever the bottle says for his exact weight, you don't go over that in a day, even alternating, and you write down every single time you give either one on a paper on the fridge, times and all, so a tired mama in the dead of night doesn't double back on herself. Weight on the bottle. Write it down. That's all. That is correct. Any pediatric nurse in this country will tell you that is correct, and careful, and kind." And Chelsea turned to me there by the coffee urns, in front of Tamika, in front of 6 women from my kitchen. And she laughed that silver laugh, and she said, "Mama Vivian, we talked about this. We talked about this." Like I was a child who had been warned once already. "I don't come into your kitchen and tell you how to make your potato salad," she said, smiling, working the room with her eyes, "so let me handle the medicine, okay? I know it's a hard adjustment. You spent a long time feeling like the expert. But you have got to stop giving medical advice to people. One of these days you're going to tell somebody the wrong thing and really hurt them. And I'm the one whose license is on the line if my family's out here playing doctor." I say this with love. And she put her hand on my shoulder for the room to see. I say it with so much love. One of these days you're going to tell somebody the wrong thing and really hurt them. She said that to me. She said it, and Tamika's face closed up confused, and my kitchen women looked at the floor. And I stood there in my apron with ham on my hands, and I did the thing I do. I said, "You're right, sugar. You're the doctor." And I went back to my ham. I did catch Tamika by the door, quiet, and I said, "Wait on the bottle, baby, write it down." And she nodded fast and squeezed my arm, and I had to trust she did it, because that is all a step-back woman gets to do. Whisper the truth at the door, and trust it took. That night, Malcolm called me. I thought, good, he heard. He is going to say something to her. And my son said, "Mama, Chelsea told me what happened at the potluck. Look, I need you to let Chelsea shine, okay? She worked her whole life for this. Every time you jump in with your nursing stuff, it's like you're competing with her, and it makes everybody uncomfortable. Can you just for me let her have this? Just be grandma, make your pies. Everybody loves your pies. Let her shine. Be grandma, make your pies." I said, "Okay, baby, I hear you." And I told my only son I loved him, because I did and I do, and I hung up the phone, and I sat in my kitchen in the dark for a long time. Everybody loves your pies. 41 years, and I had been sanded down, in my own family, to a woman who makes pies and needs to be managed so she does not embarrass the doctor. That is where I stood on the morning of the cookout. That is how low the water was. I am not telling you this so you will feel sorry for me. I am telling you so that when I describe what my hands did that afternoon and what walked across that grass toward me in a white coat, you will feel the whole floor of it drop, the same as every person on that lawn felt it drop. They had all been trained, gently, over months, to see me as the pie grandmother who fretted too much. God let them believe that right up until the second he needed it to shatter. Now, the cookout. New Canaan holds its big cookout the second Saturday of every July on the field behind the Fellowship Hall, and it is the event of our church year. 200 people, easy, smokers going since before dawn. The children's choir, horseshoes, and long folding tables under the 2 big oak trees where the elders sit in the shade and hold court. It was hot that day. I mean the kind of Alabama July hot that sits on your chest, 96 degrees by noon with the air like a wet quilt, not a breath of wind. The kind of heat old folks are always warned about and never listened to. I noticed it like I notice everything, out of the corner of a nurse's eye, and I kept a cooler of water going, and I kept after the elders under the oaks to drink it. "Curtis Boyd," I said, "that sweet tea is not water. It is near 100 degrees, and you have been standing over those smokers since before the sun. Drink you some water." He waved me off with his paper cup. "Vivian Hale," he said, grinning, "you fuss worse than my late wife, God rest her, and that woman could fuss." The men at the table laughed, and I laughed too, and I let it go. I have thought about that 1,000 times since. The one time my fussing was life and death, I softened it into a joke, because a big man does not like to be fussed at before the deacons. I will not make that mistake again. Curtis Boyd. 69. Built like a refrigerator, sang bass so low you felt it in the folding chairs. A big laughing man who had buried 2 wives and outlived a heart attack in his 50s, which meant, though I was the only one thinking it that day, that he had a heart with a history. He had been over the smokers since 6 that morning and had skipped his water pill so he would not be running to the bathroom all day. And he was, at that moment, standing at the head of the elders' table to bless the food, with 200 of us bowing our heads. Malcolm and Chelsea were there, Chelsea in a sundress with her hospital badge still clipped to the strap because she had come from a half shift, and all afternoon the 2 of them had been the family with the doctor. 3 different people brought Chelsea their aches under those oaks while I made my pies and poured my water and was grandma. Peach cobbler, sweet potato pie, a lemon pound cake. Everybody loved my pies. Deacon Boyd raised his big hands for the blessing. "Bow your heads with me, church," he said, in that bass that rolled across the whole field. "Father, we thank you for this food, and for these hands that made it, and for every soul under these trees. And Lord, we ask you to." And he stopped. He stopped in the middle of blessing food, and I was already moving before I understood why, because my body knew a quarter second before my mind did that a man does not stop partway through a prayer. My nurse's eyes came up, and I saw Curtis Boyd's face do the thing. His hand went to the center of his chest, not the left arm the movies teach you. The center, gripping, and the color went out from under his skin like water leaving a sink, and his eyes rolled up white, and that big refrigerator of a man went down backward into the folding chairs with a crash that stopped 200 hearts. And then there was that terrible half-second of silence that comes before people scream. I know that half-second. I have lived in it my whole career. It is the half-second when everybody's brain is still telling them this is not happening. I was already up out of my chair. The screaming started. Somebody hollered, "Deacon Boyd." Somebody hollered, "Call somebody." A woman started wailing, and the field surged and then froze like crowds do. Useless. A wall of bodies all leaning in and nobody moving, and I heard my own voice come out of me in a register I had not used in 2 years. The charged nurse voice, the one that cuts through a trauma bay, and it cut through that field like a blade. "Move. Back up and give him air. Now. Somebody call the doctor." "Where's the doctor?" A woman was screaming, meaning Chelsea, and I heard it. And I never looked up. "I am the doctor for the next 4 minutes," I said. "Back up. Give him room." And they moved. 200 people moved back for a woman they thought made pies, because a certain kind of voice does not ask, it tells, and something older than their opinion of me obeyed it. I went down on my knees beside Curtis Boyd, and my dress did not matter, and my old knees did not matter. The world got very quiet and slow and clear, like it did on my bedroom floor 11 years ago with Emmett, and my hands knew their order. Airway. I tipped his head, cleared his mouth, my cheek down at his lips. Breathing. Nothing. 2 fingers at the carotid, and I held them there. 1 Mississippi, 2, 3, and there was nothing under my fingers but a still man and the heat. No pulse. Not breathing. 69 years old, down less than a minute. "He's in arrest," I said, and I said it loud, and I said it to the crowd because I needed the crowd now. They were my staff, whether they knew it or not. This man's heart has stopped, and we are going to start it. I need everybody to do exactly what I say. And it was right then, kneeling over a dying deacon, that I looked up and found the one face in that crowd that should have been on the grass beside me. Chelsea. Dr. Chelsea Hale. Emergency medicine. She stood 8 feet away with both hands over her mouth, and her eyes gone huge and glassy and fixed, and she was not moving at all. "Chelsea," I said. Sharp. "Chelsea, I need you. Get down here." And my daughter-in-law, the emergency doctor, looked at that man and looked at me and did not move 1 inch. Her mouth was working, but nothing came out. It is not cowardice. It is the freeze. The body floods, the mind whites out, and the training you paid $100,000 for goes somewhere you cannot reach. Knowing what to do and being able to do it when it is real and loud and it is somebody's grandfather are 2 different countries, and she had never been to the second one. That is what a preceptor is for. And there was none in her life, because the one who could have been had been sent home to make pies. So I stopped asking her. I did not have time to raise her up. I had a man with maybe 8 minutes before his brain was gone, and every second on the frozen doctor was a second off the top of Curtis Boyd's life. You work with the hands you have, not the hands you wish you had. So I turned away from the doctor and built myself a code team out of church folks in about 4 seconds flat. By name, because I have known these people 50 years and I know exactly who does not panic. Deacon Willie. Willie Freeman, 71, calm as a pond, 30 years driving a city bus through everything Birmingham could throw at him. Willie, you get down here across from me. You're going to do exactly what I show you and not stop until I say stop. I put the heel of his hand on the center of that big chest, my hand over his, and I found the spot, and I leaned my weight into the first compression, and Curtis Boyd's chest went down under our 4 hands like a chest is supposed to, deep, and I heard the little sound the crowd makes. Push here. This deep. This fast. You know the song Stayin' Alive? Push to that. Do not stop for anything, Willie. Not if he groans, not if he throws up, not for anything, till I put my hand on your shoulder. Go. How hard? Willie said. I don't want to hurt him. You can't hurt a dead man, baby. You can only start him. Harder. There you go. And Willie went. God bless that bus driver. He went like a metronome, and his big arms found the rhythm. Sister Renata Poole, 40, runs the daycare, never rattled by anything under 4 feet tall, so nothing above 4 feet was going to rattle her either. Renata, take your phone, call 911, put it on speaker, and lay it right here by me. Tell them where we are and do not hang up. Renata's hands were shaking, but her voice held. They want to know, is he breathing? Tell them no. Tell them witnessed arrest, adult male, 69, CPR in progress, and we need paramedics fast. He is not breathing, Renata said into the phone. Steady now. A nurse is working on him. New Canaan Missionary Baptist, the field behind the fellowship hall. Please hurry. Terrence, my grandson-in-law. Jasmine's sweet, slow Heshvac boy, and thank the Lord he was not slow that day. There's a red bag in my trunk. Blue Buick, unlocked, red bag. Run. Because a nurse of 41 years never really retires. There has been an emergency kit in the trunk of my car for so long I do not remember buying it, and I knew this church did not have what it needed. Because I had been saying so at trustee meetings for 3 years to men who nodded and did nothing. While Terrence ran, I kept my eyes on Curtis and my hand near Willie's rhythm. And I did the thing I have done over every code of my life, the thing my mother's mother did over the sick in 3 counties who could not read, the thing that has never once left me. I started to sing. Low, under my breath, just for the man on the ground and for me, an old hymn, the one my grandmother sang. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I sang it slow and steady, and it kept my hand steady and my count honest. 4 different people have since told me the thing they remember most about that whole afternoon was old Vivian Hale singing a hymn over a dead man while she brought him back, calm as still water. I was not doing it for them. I was doing it for me, and for Curtis, and for God, who I was talking to the whole time in the spaces between the words. Terrence came pounding back with the red bag. I had him kneel and open it, and I talked him through it without ever taking my eyes off the patient, because my hands knew that bag blind. The blue plastic thing shaped like an S, give it here. An oral airway. I timed it between Willie's compressions, and I got Curtis Boyd's airway open, and I got the bag mask out, and I sealed it over his nose and mouth with the one-handed grip you never forget, and I told Renata's daughter, a teenager named Kayla with steady hands and a level head, to squeeze the bag, slow. One squeeze every time I nodded, and no more. Because too much air is its own kind of harm, and I was not about to trade one problem for another. And I had one more thing in that bag, the thing that mattered most, the thing that church did not have and should have. I had a portable defibrillator, an aid. I had bought it myself, with my own retirement money, 2 years back, after the trustees told me the budget did not have room for one, and it had ridden around in my Buick charged and waiting for a day I prayed would never come. That day had come. I peeled Curtis Boyd's shirt open, set the pads, one high on the right chest, one low on the left, and the machine started talking in its flat, calm robot voice, analyzing, and I threw up my hand and called the words I have called across so many rooms. Everybody clear. Hands off him. Willie, off, clear. Willie lifted his hands. The field went dead silent. 200 people and not one sound but a robot voice and my own breath. And the machine said, in its flat way, shock advised, "Is that thing gonna hurt him?" A deacon breathed behind me. "It is going to save him, if God's willing," I said. "Hands off." Shock advised. That means the heart is not dead, church. It means the heart is quivering, fibrillating, a bag of worms instead of a fist, and there is something there to shock back into rhythm. It is the best bad news there is. Clear, I said one more time, and I looked to be sure every hand was off that man, my grandson-in-law, the bus driver, the daycare teacher, all of them clear. And I pressed the button. Curtis Boyd's big body jumped once on the grass. Resume Willie go, because you do not wait and stare after a shock that is the movies again. You go right back to the compressions and buy the drug a road to travel on. Am I still going right? Willie gasped. You are perfect. Don't quit on me. Kayla, breath, good. Renata, what's their time out? 4 minutes, they said. Renata called from the phone. Tell them keep coming. We are holding him. And I sang, low, and Kayla squeezed the bag on my nod, and somewhere far off across the fields of that hot afternoon, thin under the hymn, I heard the first sound of a siren. And that is the picture God had been setting up for months, one insult at a time. A retired nurse they had sanded down to a pie grandmother, running a full code out of the trunk of her own car, singing a hymn over a deacon while the doctor of the family stood frozen 8 feet back. The siren was coming, and I could not yet know that riding in the front of that ambulance was the answer to a plain prayer I had prayed by my bed. He was about to step onto that grass, and he knew my name. The ambulance came bouncing across the grass, 2 paramedics swinging out before it fully stopped, and behind it a fire department truck that runs an emergency physician out to the bad calls in our county. I clocked all of it in one sweep and kept my rhythm going, because a code does not stop being your code until you have handed it off clean. You do not let go of the patient until the words are said and the other hands are on him. I have watched good outcomes fall apart in the 4 seconds of a sloppy handoff, and Curtis Boyd was not going to be a sloppy handoff, not on my grass. The lead paramedic went down on his knees across from me, a young man, competent, and he opened his mouth to ask me the questions you ask a bystander, the slow, careful questions you ask somebody you assume knows nothing, and I would not let him spend the time. I gave it to him like you hand it to a colleague, fast, flat, complete. 69-year-old male, witnessed arrest. Down about 6 minutes now. Bystander CPR, immediate and continuous, quality compressions. He's been bagged with an oral airway in. We've delivered one shock from the ED on a shock-advised rhythm about 4 minutes ago and resumed immediately. No return of pulse yet. He's got a cardiac history. Prior heart attack in his 50s. And he skipped a diuretic this morning and has been in the heat since dawn, so think about his potassium. He's yours. What do you need from me? The young paramedic's eyebrows went up on his forehead, and he looked at me for 1/2 second, this black church lady in a good dress down on the ground. And then he did the smart thing. The thing that told me he was going to be good at his job for 30 years. Which is, he did not waste a breath being surprised. He said, "Copy all that. Keep your compressor going till we get the monitor on," and we worked. I kept Willie going while they got their pads and their monitor and their drugs out, and I called Willie off clean, hand on his shoulder, off. Willie, beautiful work. Off now. And their machine took over the reading, and there was the man's rhythm on a real screen at last. And it was about then, in the noise of all that the door of the fire department truck opened, and the emergency physician stepped down onto the grass and started walking toward us, pulling on a pair of gloves. And I looked up from the patient to give my report a second time to whoever was running the show. And I stopped. I stopped, like Curtis Boyd stopped in his blessing. Because I knew that walk before I knew the face, a slightly turned-in left foot, a way of holding the shoulders like the whole world might need lifting, and he had decided to be the one to lift it. And it walked 11 years off of me in a single second, back to a July night in the doorway of Trauma 1, and the most terrified young man God ever sent me. Dr. Daniel Okafor, attending physician now, emergency department. The very building, and once, first week of a July, the green and terrified resident I told you about at the start. The one who froze solid in a doorway with both hands in the air while a man coded, until a night shift nurse put her hand flat between his shoulder blades and walked him through his first save with her mouth at his ear. 11 minutes in a hallway afterward, while he shook and wept and swore he would quit medicine that very night. And I told him he would not, and I told him why. I have never repeated one word of what I said in that hallway, and I never will repeat it to you either. Because some things a woman keeps. That terrified boy was now the calm, broad-shouldered man walking across my church lawn to run this code, and half the young doctors in this town had come up under his hand, and he had come up under mine. He reached the patient and dropped to a knee, and his eyes went to the monitor and to the paramedic, and he opened his mouth to take report. All business, not looking at me yet, just another bystander in his side vision. And the paramedic jerked his head toward me and said, "This lady ran the whole code before we got here. She's got the story." And Dr. Okafor turned his head to look at me for the first time. I watched it happen on his face, the same as I have watched 1,000 things move across 1,000 faces. He saw an older woman in a good church dress, and something snagged, and his eyes came back to me and really landed. And 11 years fell off of him, just as they had off of me. His mouth came open, and the professional voice he had ready did not come out. What came out, low and wondering, before the paramedics and 200 people gone dead quiet, was one word. "Nurse Hale?" I said, "Hello, Daniel. Your patient's been down about 7 minutes. One shock. Good CPR throughout. Let's get him back. You can hug my neck after." And Dr. Okafor laughed, one short cracked open laugh with something wet behind it, and wiped it off his face, and became the doctor again because the man on the ground needed him to. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He said it to me, down in that grass, with the whole field watching like you say it to somebody you have said it to 1,000 times. And then the two of us ran the rest of that code together like 19 years had never ended. Him calling the orders and me feeding him the history and anticipating his hands, the drug before he asked for it, the pad in his palm before he turned for it. It was the most alive I had felt in 2 years. They pushed the drugs. They shocked him one more time, a real shock off a real machine, and Dr. Okafor called for the compressions to resume and looked at the clock. And we all worked. And I sang under my breath because I could not help it. Guide me, O thou great Jehovah. And then the paramedic watching the monitor said the sweetest 4 words in the whole language of my old life. I've got a rhythm. Curtis Boyd had a pulse. He back? Willie said, arms still up, chest heaving. Vivian, is he back? He's back, Willie. You brought him back. Look what your hands did. Dr. Okafor's gloved fingers went to the man's neck to confirm it, and they came up sure, and he let out a breath, and the whole field made a sound I will hear on my dying day. 200 church people making the sound of a prayer answered out loud. Half a sob and half a shout, and all of it praise. And somebody started singing, because it is a Baptist cookout, and a man had just come back in that grass, and you cannot expect those people not to sing. They got Curtis Boyd loaded, breathing on his own now, color coming back up under his skin like water filling a sink in reverse. And just before they closed the doors, Dr. Okafor turned around and found me again in the crowd. And he did a thing I could not have scripted if I had a year to try. He was still by the ambulance, and there were 200 people spread out on that lawn, and my son was there, and my daughter-in-law was there, still pale, still standing off to the side where she had frozen. And Dr. Okafor raised his voice, so it carried, like you raise your voice when you have decided something will be heard. And he said, "Who is this woman? Whose people is she?" And there was a beat. And then my son Malcolm, of all people, my son, stepped forward half a step and said, in a voice gone strange and small, "She's my mother." And Dr. Okafor looked at Malcolm, and looked back at me, and then he said it, to my son and my daughter-in-law and my whole congregation and the hot July air, and I have played it back so many times I could recite it in my sleep. "Your mother," Dr. Okafor said, "is Vivian Hale. You need to know who you've got in your family, sir, because I am not sure you do. This woman trained half the emergency physicians in this city. She trained me. I was the worst resident that hospital ever took in, and I would have quit medicine in my first month, and every patient I have saved in 11 years would be dead if this woman had not stood me up on my feet one night and refused to let me fall. We have a checklist we still teach every new resident on their first day in that department. Every single one of them learns it. It has her name on it. It is called the Hale Protocol. I have taught the Hale Protocol to doctors who are now teaching it to other doctors in other cities. She wrote it at her kitchen table. He looked around at all of us. "What you just watched her do in this grass," he said, with a bus driver and a bag from her trunk, most licensed physicians could not do. I watched her hand a full resuscitation off to my paramedics cleaner, then residents hand it to me inside the hospital. So whatever this family thinks it knows about what Vivian Hale did for a living, I would sit down and learn it over, because you are related to a legend of that emergency department, and half this city owes her its life and does not know her face. And then he climbed in the ambulance with Curtis Boyd, because a saved man is still a fragile man, and the doors closed, and it drove off across the grass, and left behind it a silence like the silence after the last note of a hymn. And 200 people slowly turned around and looked at the pie grandmother kneeling there in the grass. And I got up, grass-stained, my good dress ruined, 63 years old with every eye on that field on me. I made no speech. I found my daughter-in-law's face in the crowd and I said not one word to her, because the man from the ambulance had already said them all. And I walked to the water cooler I had tended all day and poured myself a paper cup of water, because my throat was dry from singing. And Mother Hattie Simmons, 86 years old, came and stood next to me and slid her little dry hand into mine. "What I tell you," she said, quiet, not to me exactly, to the whole field. "What did I tell every one of you? Everybody at this church knows whose hands they want on them when it counts." "Hush, Hattie," I said. "I will not hush," she said. "I have hushed 50 years for you. Not today." And a deacon near us, a big man who had called me the pie lady same as Curtis, took off his straw hat and held it against his chest and said, "No, ma'am. Not today," and I understood he did not mean Hattie. He meant me, and Hattie and I just stood there in the shade of the oak while the whole church rearranged everything it thought it knew. Malcolm came to my house that night. I was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea when I heard his truck, and he came in the back door like he has since he was a boy, and he sat down across from me. And my son, 34 years old, put his face in his hands, and he cried like something in him had broken loose that had been jammed a long time. "Mama," he said, into his hands. "Mama, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know." And I let him cry, because a person needs to cry sometimes before they can hear their own self talk, and after a while he lifted his head, and his eyes were red, and he said, "That doctor, the way he talked about you, in front of everybody." And that man came back. He was dead, Mama, I saw him. He was dead on that ground, and you brought him back, and you were singing a hymn while you did it, and I have never in my whole life. And he had to stop. "Malcolm," I said. "I let her call you Bedpans," he said, "at your own table." And I laughed. "Mama," I laughed, "and I took your pins off the wall. I put her diploma where your pins were. I made you take your own life off your own wall so my wife could hang up a piece of paper." He looked like he might be sick. "Who does that? Who does that to their own mother?" "Malcolm," I said. "Stop. I can't stop, Mama. I keep seeing you take those pins down." I said, "Stop. Look up here at me." And he looked up. Now, some of you wanted a different scene just then. You wanted me to make that boy grovel, to lay every wound out on the table and make him bleed for each one. I understand the wanting. But that is not the arithmetic I was raised on. What my grandmother knew, that no coat can teach you, is that you do not heal a person by breaking them level with how they broke you. You heal them by being, out loud, the thing they failed to be. So I reached across my own table, and I took my son's 2 hands in my 2 hands, the hands that had brought a man back that afternoon, and I said, "Baby, look at me. You didn't know, because I never let you see. That is on me as much as you. The people who love a nurse never see her work. You saw me leave, and you saw me come home tired, and you built your whole idea of me out of the leaving and the tiredness. I let you. I thought my life would testify all by itself someday, and I was too proud to say one word to hurry it along. So we were both wrong, and today God settled it out on that grass, and I do not mean to spend whatever years I have left making you pay interest on a debt that got paid this afternoon. I forgive you. It is already done. It was done before you walked in that door. What do I do now, Mama?" he said. "How do I fix it?" "You don't fix 40 years in one night," I said. "You start by seeing me. That's all I ever wanted. Not a wall, not a speech. Just for my own boy to see what my hands did while he was sleeping safe. I see you," he said. "God help me, I see you now. Then it's a start." And my son cried some more, and this time it was the other kind of crying, and I rose and made him a plate. Because it is the one thing I know how to do. And this time when I served my child, it was not a way to survive a cruel room. It was just a mother feeding her boy in a kitchen where the truth had finally sat down at the table with us. But notice who did not come to my house that night. Chelsea did not come, and not only out of pride. It was shame. The deep, drowning kind that cannot make itself walk up to a door. She had stood 8 feet from a dying man with her hands over her mouth while the woman she called Bedpans ran the code and sang, and there is no coat thick enough to keep you warm through a thing like that. And a person that is shamed, you cannot chase. It only shames them worse. You let the thing that is coming come and find them. And it was coming. Curtis Boyd lived. You should have that before anything else, because a man's life is worth more than my vindication. He spent 11 days in that hospital, and I went and sat with him most of them, and on about the 4th day, when he was strong enough to be ornery, he took my hand in both of his big ones and would not let go. They told me, he said, his voice still rough from the tube, the doctors told me what you did in that grass. Said if you'd waited on the ambulance, I'd have been gone, or worse than gone. Vivian, I have been calling you the Pie Lady for 15 years. You have, I said. And worse than that. You said I fussed like your late wife. My late wife, he said, and his eyes filled up, was the smartest woman I ever knew, and I never appreciated her either till she was gone. So you take that as the highest thing I have got. He squeezed my hand. You are my angel. I don't care how much you hush me. In front of God and the nurses, Vivian Hale, you are my angel. Hush, Curtis, I said. I will tell you something else, he said. That coat girl, your son's wife. She was standing right there, and she froze up solid. And you, in your church dress, you never blinked. Now which one of you would you want kneeling over you? Don't, I said. She's young. She'll learn. God's not done with her. He closed his eyes. He's not done with you either, Angel, and I let him call me that, because a man who has been dead has earned the right to say a thing out loud. That story walked out of the hospital before I did, up every hallway faster than any memo. And it landed on the desk of the chief of the emergency department, who turned out to be a woman I had precepted long ago. A doctor named Grace Adeyemi, a shaky resident on my nights back before she was anybody, who had cried at my retirement and told me the place would never be the same. I took that for the kind thing people say. It was not the kind thing people say. She did not write me a letter. She got in her car and drove to my house on a Saturday and sat at my kitchen table and put a folder down on it and said what she came to say to my face. Miss Hale, Grace said, I'm going to talk, and you're going to let me finish before you start being humble at me, because I know you. She opened the folder. You know what we do with new residents every July. Green as grass, scared to death. One of them freezes on his first code exactly like I froze on mine, exactly like Daniel Okafor froze on his. And you know who used to catch them. You did. For 19 years. And when you left, we lost that. We have got brilliant young doctors who cannot run a room, and there is nobody left to stand behind them. Grace, I'm not finished. She slid a page across to me. This is a job. Clinical instructor. You come back and you teach the Hale protocol yourself, the one that already carries your name, and you teach them the part that isn't on the paper. The listening you learn with your own eyes. The thing we could never write down. Every incoming class. In the building. With a badge and a title. She tapped the page, and a salary, because I know you'll try to do it for free, and I will not let you insult 41 years by doing it for free. I looked at that page on my table a long minute. You want me to teach doctors? I said. I want you to teach the people who teach the doctors, Grace said. That is what you always were. We just never gave it a title. She put her hand over mine. Come home, Miss Hale. The department misses its mother. And if I say no, then I will drive back out here next Saturday, Grace said. And the Saturday after that, until you say yes, because I did not become chief of that department to watch the best teacher it ever had make pies in her kitchen. I did not answer her that day. I told her I would pray on it, and I walked her to her car, and then I got down my worn leather box from the closet and opened it on my bed, and I cried. Not sad tears, they were the tears of a woman who had spent a whole inheritance of silence and just been told, out loud, at her own table, that the ledger had balanced after all. My mother told me the Lord keeps his own books, and I believed her on faith, without proof, for 60 years. Now I had the proof in my two hands. And all of you who have served and never been thanked, hear me. It comes. It may not come the day you want it or the shape you pictured. It may take 41 years and a man's heart stopping in the grass. But it comes. I took the job. And here is where God, who I have always suspected has a sense of humor drier than my mother's, arranged the last piece. Grace called me the week I signed the papers to go over the schedule. Now, orientation's the second week of July, Grace said, and you'll have the whole incoming class for it, all the new residents, and she stopped, and I heard her catch it on her end. Miss Hale, your daughter-in-law, what's her name? Chelsea, I said. Chelsea Hale. Emergency medicine, first year, a long pause. Miss Hale, she's in this class. She will be sitting in your orientation. There's no way around it. Every resident does it. Do you want me to know? I said. Leave it exactly like it is. And then I had to sit down at my own kitchen table, and I laughed until I wheezed, because my daughter-in-law, the brand new doctor, was going to have to sit in a classroom and learn my checklist from me. She was going to train under the retired nurse she called Bedpans, in the building where I was a legend and she was 2 months old, and the whole thing carried my name. Now, I could have made that a punishment, and I have made peace with the part of me that wanted to, because I am a saved woman, not a finished one. But the cruelty in Chelsea was never really about me. It was fear wearing a coat. People terrified of being small spend their lives making other people smaller, so they have something to stand on. She was not my enemy. She was a scared child who had never been stood up on her feet by somebody who refused to let her fall. And now God had put me in a room with her whole cohort and said, "All right, Vivian, here, teach so." On the first day of orientation, in a classroom at my old hospital, with a badge that said Vivian Hale, clinical instructor clipped to my good blue dress, I stood up in front of a room of terrified brand new residents. Chelsea was in the second row, and she could not look at me. She looked at the table, at her hands, like 100 scared people I have watched look anywhere but at the truth. And I taught. I did not lecture them. I told them the truth. The machine is going to lie to you, I said. It will show you a pretty number while a person dies in front of you. The skin does not lie. The lips do not lie. Learn to read the person and not just the monitor. That is the whole thing I came here to teach, and it took me 41 years to learn it, so you may want to write it down. A young man in the front raised his hand. Instructor Hale, how do you know when to trust your gut over the numbers? You don't, not yet, I said. For now you trust mine. That is what I came back for. You call me before you send somebody home wrong. Every one of you will have my telephone number before you leave this room, and I mean for you to use it at all hours, and not to apologize when you do." A woman in the back raised her hand. "And if the attending overrules us and we still think we're right? Then you say it out loud, once, respectfully, and you write it down," I said. "And if it's a baby, you say it twice." I was overruled by doctors who were wrong more times than I can count, and I learned to make my objections so clear and so calm that being overruled became their problem and not mine. You are not here to be liked. You are here so everybody goes home. And somewhere partway through that first class, I watched Chelsea's head come up, slow, and I saw her start, against her own will, to learn. And at the end of that first class, in front of all of them, Chelsea raised her hand. Picture it. A room full of her peers, the doctors she needed to respect her, the exact worst room in the world to do a hard thing in, which is precisely why it was the room God chose, because He had already taught me that vindication happens in front of the same crowd that watched the wound. She raised her hand, and her voice was not the silver laugh. It was small, and it shook, and she said, "Instructor Hale, before we go, I need to say something, and I need to say it in front of everybody, because I did the other thing where everyone could hear." And the room went quiet. "Some of you are going to hear the story of what happened at that church," Chelsea said. "It's already going around the hospital, so you should hear it from me. There was a cardiac arrest at a family event this summer, and I was there, and I'm an emergency medicine resident, and I froze. I completely froze. I stood there, and I did nothing while a man died in front of me." Her voice cracked, and she pushed through it. "And the person who ran that code, and shocked him, and bagged him, and brought him back and handed him to the medics cleaner than I could have, was this woman. And I need you to know that for a year before that day, I treated her like she was nothing. I called her career Bedpans. To her face, at her own dinner table. Because she was a nurse, and I had just gotten my coat, and I thought the coat made me better than her. She looked at me then, finally, straight at me, with the whole class watching. It doesn't. I know that now. I knew it the second I froze, and she didn't. Instructor Hale, I am so sorry. I am so ashamed. And I would be grateful, for as long as you'll have me, to learn how to be half the clinician you are." Now, there was a version of me, a younger version, a more wounded version, that would have let that girl sit in it a while. Let the silence stretch. Make her feel the 8 feet she stood frozen. And I will be plain with you. The younger version was in the room with me, standing right behind my sternum, wanting her minute. But I am 63 years old, and I have brought people back from the dead, and I know how little the settling of scores is worth when the machine finally goes flat. So I did the only thing my grandmother would have called strength. I walked to the second row and put my hand flat between Chelsea's shoulder blades, the exact place I once put it on a drowning resident named Daniel Okafor, and I felt her shaking under my palm like he had shaken, and I gave that girl from Bessemer her 11 minutes. I will not tell you what I said. It belongs to the scared people I have said it to, and nobody else. But when I stood back up, my daughter-in-law was crying the good kind, and she has called me Mama Vivian in a different voice ever since. Not the sugar voice, the real one, the one a daughter uses. The hospital held the cohort's pinning ceremony that fall, the little ritual where the new residents get formally welcomed into the department, families in folding chairs, the chief up front with a speech. Grace Adeyemi called me 2 weeks before it. "Miss Hale, I want you on that stage. Not in the audience. On the stage. You are going to help pin this class. because you are the reason half of them will live through their intern year. Grace, that is their day. I don't need to be. It was not a question, Miss Hale. That was a courtesy, before I put your name in the program. So, I sat up on that stage in my good lavender suit, and when it came Chelsea's turn to cross and receive her department pin, it was my 2 hands that pinned it to her white coat. In front of the whole room, in front of Malcolm in the 3rd row, with tears standing in his eyes. And before she stepped away, Grace took the microphone. Before we close, Grace said, "I want to introduce somebody. These last months, you have all been learning a protocol. It has a name. It is called the Hale Protocol, and I know some of you assumed Hale was a dead founder on a plaque somewhere." The room laughed. She is not dead, and she is not on a plaque. She is sitting right here, and she pinned 6 of you tonight with her own hands. Nurse Vivian Hale trained the attendings who trained you. She wrote the checklist that will keep your patients alive at 3 in the morning, and this past summer she ran a cardiac arrest in a church field and walked a man back from the dead with a hymn under her breath. Stand up, Miss Hale. Let this class see the face behind the name they have been mispronouncing all semester. And I stood up, 63 years old, in front of a room full of young doctors and their proud families and my own son, and they came to their feet. Every one of them. And they clapped. And it was not for a coat, and it was not for a diploma. And it went on a good long time. And in the 2nd row of that standing crowd, clapping the hardest, crying without any shame at all, was the girl from Bessemer who had once called every bit of it Bedpans. And here is the thing that healed me most, and I never expected it. It was not the apology, or the badge, or Dr. Okafor's voice carrying across the grass. It was watching that girl get good. Because she did get good. She started calling me, all hours of the night. My phone rang at 2 in the morning about a month in, and it was Chelsea, and her voice was tight. "Mama Vivian, I'm sorry to call so late. I've got a woman, 31, came in short of breath, and everything on the monitor looks fine, and something is wrong with her and I can't find it, and I don't want to send her home." A breath. You always said the machines lie and the skin never does. Her skin's telling me something. Tell me what I'm not seeing. Is she talking to you in full sentences? No. Little bursts. 3, 4 words. Then, you already know, baby. The machine can read pretty while a person is drowning. Trust the sentences over the numbers. Keep her, and go looking for the clot. There was a silence, and then, okay, thank you. She called me back at 4. You were right. It was a clot. We caught it. Mama Vivian. She's got 2 kids, and that girl cried on the phone, and I stood in my dark kitchen and cried too, and somewhere in that call the checklist with my name on it stopped being a monument to my hurt and became what I always meant it to be, which is a thing that keeps people alive after I am gone. She is going to be a wonderful doctor. She is already becoming one. And I got to be the one who stood her up. There is no house, no will, no inheritance that could buy what it feels like to watch somebody who wronged you become, partly because of your mercy, a person who saves lives. That is a wealth they do not tax. Now I owe you one more thread, because I am a woman who ties off what I start, and I told you about my Jasmine, and the sparkles at the corner of her sight, and the word I begged her to say to her doctor that she never said. That word did get said. I said it myself, out loud in a doctor's office the week after the cookout, because everything had changed and I was Grandma Vivian again with standing to stand. I said preeclampsia to her doctor, along with the sparkles and the headache and the swelling and the blood pressure I had watched climb all summer. And that doctor went still and checked and Jasmine's pressure was up where it frightens you, and there was protein where there should not have been. And they caught it. In time. They managed it. And got my Jasmine and her baby clear to a safe delivery. And I was in that room, gowned up, holding my granddaughter's hand while she brought a brand new life into the world. A fat, furious little girl with a full head of hair and lungs that announced her to the whole floor. They named her Vivian. And when they laid that baby on Jasmine's chest, my great-great-niece, Vivian II, Jasmine looked up at me over the top of that squalling little head, exhausted and shining. "You told me, Grandma," she said. "Back at your sink. You told me the word, and I didn't say it. Why did I listen to her over you?" "Because the world told you to, baby," I said. "That is not your fault. You hush now and look at your girl. If you hadn't come to that appointment, and she could not finish it, and she did not need to because we both knew how that sentence ends in this state. For mothers who look like us, when nobody in the room can see. I have spent my whole life in the rooms where that sentence ends the other way. And I got to keep my own blood out of those rooms, because 41 years had taught my eyes to see a bell ringing that a coat 2 months old could not hear. So that is my whole inheritance, if you want to add it up like the world adds. A badge. A title. A checklist with my name on it that will outlive me. A son who cries at my kitchen table now and means it. A daughter-in-law who calls me for the answers. A congregation that knows exactly whose hands it wants when the moment comes. A deacon named Curtis Boyd, who calls me his angel and whom I still hush. And a fat little girl named Vivian who is alive, and whose mama is alive because an old nurse could see. I want to tell you about the wall. You remember my front hallway. You remember Emmett hanging that shadow box himself, level as a deacon's conscience. And you remember me reaching up with my own 2 steady hands and taking my own life down off my own wall so a diploma could hang there instead. I have carried that picture through this whole story, and I owe you the end of it. I did not ask for my wall back. I need that clear, because it matters to how I was raised. I did not go to Malcolm and say, "Take her diploma down, put my pins back." That is not the arithmetic. If a wall has to be demanded, it is not really yours anymore anyway. It was Chelsea who did it. She came to my house on a Sunday, a few months into her learning, and she had a package under her arm, and she stood in my hallway, in front of that diploma of hers, and she said, "Mama Vivian, I need to put this right, and I need to do it with my own hands, because I took it down with my own hands." And she reached up and she took her own diploma off my wall, the frame she had brought to my house in her own car for her own celebration dinner, and she set it aside, and she opened the package. And inside it was my shadow box, my little gold years, except she had had it cleaned and rematted and the brass plate re-engraved, and under my name it now read, and I never asked her to do this. It read, Vivian Hale, Arn, Clinical Instructor, and below that, the woman who taught the ones who teach us. And she hung it back exactly where Emmett had hung it. And she used a level, because she is a careful girl when she decides to be. And she got it dead even. And then she stepped back, and the 2 of us stood in that hallway and looked at 41 years back up on the wall where they belonged. "Where does yours go?" I asked her, because a diploma is still an accomplishment, and I am not a woman who takes anybody's coat away. I only ever wanted mine acknowledged alongside it. And Chelsea said, "In the hallway at the hospital, actually. They're letting the new cohort hang our diplomas outside the classroom where you teach. So mine's going to hang right down the hall from where they teach your protocol. That feels right. That feels like where it goes." And I touched the glass over my pins like Emmett used to, and I said nothing. because some things are too full for words, and Chelsea stood there next to me, my daughter now for real, and we let the hallway be quiet. So here is the thing I know. At 63. And here is the whole reason I told you all of this instead of taking it quiet to my grave like the women I come from would have. The world will hand you a hierarchy. It will put the coat on top and the calling at the bottom. It will teach a bright young woman to say bedpans, teach a scared mother to trust the loud voice over the true one, teach a good son to build his whole idea of his mother out of her tiredness, because he never got to see her glory. And the world will be wrong, loudly, for a long time, sometimes for 41 years, and you will serve and take your own life down off your own wall and say nothing, and you will wonder in the dark whether anybody is keeping count. Somebody is keeping count. That is the whole thing I came to tell you. A title cannot add to what a life of quiet service was worth, and a laugh at a dinner table cannot subtract from it, because the value was never theirs to set. God does not need you to wear a coat to know what your hands have done. He kept his own record of every night shift and every scared child you stood back up, and one day, in the shape you least expect, on the hottest Saturday of some summer, he will read the ledger out loud, and the whole field will go quiet, and everybody who ever called you small will turn around and finally see. You do not have to make them see. That is his job, and he is never late. Your job is only to keep your hands ready, keep your mouth kind, keep serving, and let your life speak for itself, because it will. Now, I have kept you a long while, and I thank you for staying with an old nurse to the end of her story. Before you go, do 2 things for me. First, tell me in the comments about the one in your life whose work went unseen. The mother, the grandmother, the nurse, the janitor, whose hands held a family up while everybody looked right through them. Say their name down there. Let us make a wall of them tonight. A wall nobody can take down. And second, if you have ever had to smile and refill the tea while somebody took the credit for your whole life, then subscribe and stay a while. Because I tell one of these every week, for the overlooked and the faithful and the ones who serve, and I would be honored to keep you company. I am Vivian Hale. My hands are still steady, and I will see you next Sunday.